My name is Natasha, and I'm 32 years old. 3 days ago, my younger sister Bianca stood in our parents' living room and accused me of stealing her emerald bracelet. A bracelet I'd never even touched. Before I could defend myself, my mother, Patricia, turned on me with a fury I'd never seen before. "You've always envied her," she hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. My father, Vincent, didn't even give me a chance to speak. He just pointed toward the door, his face hard as stone. "Leave. I won't shelter a thief in my house." They threw me out like I was nothing. But as I sat in my car that night, shivering and humiliated in the darkness, I didn't just cry. I didn't just feel sorry for myself. I opened my phone and went straight to my banking app. I canceled the mortgage payment on their house. I canceled the tuition for Bianca's elite design school. And I canceled the lease payment on her brand new Mercedes. They had absolutely no idea that their so-called disappointment of a daughter was the only thing keeping their perfect, polished lives from crumbling into dust. Before I tell you what happened next, if you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The weekly family dinner. My father Vincent insists on it religiously. He calls it preserving family bonds. I call it my regular dose of humiliation. I sat at that heavy wooden table, trying to make myself invisible, while my sister Bianca held everyone's attention. She's 35, the pride of the family, and she never lets anyone forget it. She was glowing that evening, talking endlessly about her recent visit to her fiancé Dominic's family estate. Dominic is everything my parents ever wanted for her. Wealthy, well-connected, and from old money. They were absolutely captivated by me, Bianca said, flashing the enormous diamond on her finger for what must have been the 20th time that week. Dominic's mother, Vivian, told me I carry myself with natural elegance. She said I fit seamlessly into their world. My mother, Patricia, practically glowed with pride. She lives for moments like these. Of course they were impressed, sweetheart. Our family has always valued refinement and dignity. We know how to present ourselves properly. She said the word properly while glancing directly at me, making sure I caught her meaning. It's such a blessing. At least one of my daughters understands the importance of reputation and grace. I ignored the jab. I pulled out my phone under the table, checking the real-time market data. I'm a cryptocurrency and stock trader. My family thinks that means I'm unemployed playing games on a computer all day. They had absolutely no idea that my so-called games pay for the roof over their heads and every luxury they take for granted. I was so absorbed in analyzing a chart that I didn't realize my elbow was too close to my water glass. When I reached for my phone charger, I knocked the glass over. Cold water and ice spilled across the polished table. Rushing toward Bianca's designer handbag, the entire table fell silent. Bianca stared at the spreading puddle, then slowly turned her eyes to me. Her expression, which had been bright and joyful just seconds before, twisted into pure rage. "Natasha!" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the entire dining room. "Can't you do a single thing right? You ruin absolutely everything." I grabbed my napkin quickly, trying to soak up the water. "I'm so sorry, Bianca. It was completely an accident." But Bianca wasn't looking at the water anymore. Her hand flew to her neck, her perfectly manicured fingers patting frantically at her bare collarbone. Her face shifted from anger to sudden panic. "Wait," she whispered, her voice sharp with alarm. "My bracelet! Where's my emerald bracelet?" Before anyone could respond, she shoved her chair back violently and bolted from the dining room. We could hear her footsteps pounding up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. "What on earth is she talking about?" my father Vincent grumbled, annoyed at yet another disruption to his perfect dinner. My mother looked worried, her hand pressed to her chest. She was wearing the emerald bracelet Vivian gave her, the one from Dominic's mother. Oh dear, I hope she just misplaced it somewhere. We heard a frantic shriek from upstairs, followed by the violent sound of drawers being yanked open and slammed shut. The heavy thud of Bianca's footsteps running back down the hall sounded desperate and wild. She reappeared in the doorway, but this time she wasn't just angry. Tears were streaming down her face in huge theatrical sobs that immediately put my parents on high alert. "It's gone," she wailed, pressing her hands together dramatically. "My emerald bracelet, the one Vivienne gave me. It was on my dresser just 5 minutes ago, and now it's completely gone." The room erupted into chaos. My mother rushed to Bianca's side immediately. "Oh, sweetheart, are you absolutely sure? Maybe it fell behind the dresser, or rolled under something." "I know exactly where I left it, Mom," Bianca said, her tear-filled eyes locking onto me with cold accusation. She raised a trembling finger and pointed it directly at me across the entire length of the table. It was her. She did this. I froze, my napkin still clutched in my hand. "What are you talking about?" "You've been staring at it all evening," Bianca screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "You've been jealous of me and Dominic from the very beginning. You're just a pathetic waste of space, and you couldn't stand watching me be happy. So you stole it." "Bianca, that's completely insane," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. "I didn't steal your bracelet. I didn't even go into your room." My mother Patricia scoffed loudly, her face filled with disgust. "You're such a terrible liar, Natasha." "It's the truth," I insisted, looking desperately at my father. "Dad, please tell her. Tell her I wouldn't do this." "Don't you dare lie to me, Natasha," Bianca screamed, her face red and blotchy with fury. "You're just a jealous thief." Before I could say another word, she stormed past me and headed straight for my bedroom. "Bianca, what are you doing?" I shouted, running after her. "Get out of my room right now." She ignored me completely. She burst through my bedroom door and started tearing the place apart like a woman possessed. She yanked open my dresser drawers, throwing my clothes onto the floor in chaotic piles. "Stop it," I cried, trying to grab her arm. "You can't just barge in here and do this." "Get your hands off me, thief," she spat, shoving me hard against the wall. My parents, Vincent and Patricia, just stood in my doorway watching. They didn't move to stop her. They didn't even try. "Look at this," Bianca yelled, still rummaging through my things. "She's being violent. That proves she's guilty." Bianca ripped the pillow off my bed, and there, lying on the bare mattress, was a small silver pendant. I felt my blood turn to ice. Bianca snatched it up triumphantly, her eyes wide with malicious victory. She held it high in the air, marching back to the hallway, where my parents stood frozen. "Here," she screamed, thrusting it right into my parents' faces. "I told you she was in my room. I found this under my pillow earlier today. She must have dropped it when she was stealing the bracelet." My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh, Natasha, how could you do something like this?" My father's face turned dark red, his jaw clenched tight. But I couldn't even speak. I just stared at the pendant in horror. That was my pendant, the one my best friend gave me for my birthday, the one I'd been searching for all week. Bianca hadn't found it under her pillow. She just pulled it from under my own pillow. She must have stolen it from me days ago, planted it in my room, and was now lying about where she found it. She was framing me, and my parents were believing every single word. "I'm being framed," I screamed, desperation rising in my throat like bile. "Mom, Dad, can't you see what's happening? She took that pendant from me days ago. She planted it here. She's lying to you." I looked at my mother, Patricia, pleading with every fiber of my being. "Mom, please, you have to believe me. I didn't steal anything from her." My mother's face, which had been pale with shock, hardened into a mask of pure fury. She stepped forward, and before I could even react, her hand cracked across my face. The slap was so hard my head snapped to the side, my cheek burning instantly with sharp, stinging pain. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You stand there, caught red-handed, and you still have the audacity to lie to my face. You dare to accuse your own sister?" "But I didn't." "Shut your mouth," she screamed, cutting me off. "Just shut up. I know exactly what this is about. You're jealous. You've always been jealous of Bianca. Jealous of her life. Jealous of her success. jealous of her fiancé. You couldn't stand seeing her happy. She jabbed a sharp finger into my chest, her face twisted with rage. You and your pathetic little computer hobby. We all know you're completely broke. We all know you're a total failure. You probably thought you could pawn that bracelet for cash. Did you really think we wouldn't figure it out? You're not just a failure, Natasha. You're a liar and a thief. Her words cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. I looked past her desperately to my father Vincent. He'd been silent this entire time, his arms crossed, just watching everything unfold. Dad, I whispered, my voice breaking. She's lying. You know I would never do something like this. My father stared at me for a long, cold moment. I saw no doubt in his eyes, no compassion, only pure disgust. He slowly shook his head, his face filled with disappointment and contempt. I always knew you'd never amount to anything, he said, his voice flat and final. Just a worthless waste of space playing on a computer. And now you're nothing more than a common thief. The finality in my father's voice was absolute and crushing. I don't need a thief living under my roof, Vincent said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He pointed a thick finger directly at me. I don't need a daughter who brings this kind of shame and disgrace into my home. Dad, I didn't do anything, I whispered. But my words were completely useless. He had already made his judgment. He walked over to where my purse sat on the dining room chair. Before I could even move, he grabbed it roughly. What are you doing? I asked, my voice rising in panic. He didn't answer. He seized my arm in a painfully tight grip, his fingers digging deep into my skin, and started dragging me toward the front door. Dad, stop, you're hurting me, I struggled, trying to twist out of his grasp, but he was far too strong. Get her out of this house, Marcus, my mother Patricia said coldly from the hallway, her arms crossed over her chest. She was no longer crying. Her face was just cold and emotionless. Let go of me, I pleaded, my voice breaking as I fought against his iron grip. But he dragged me through the entryway, past all the family photos hanging on the walls. Pictures of Bianca winning awards, pictures of my parents on tropical vacations. Not a single photo of me. He fumbled with the deadbolt, still holding my arm tightly, and wrenched the heavy front door open. The cold night air hit my face like a slap, a shocking contrast to the stifling heat of the dining room. Get out, he growled, his voice filled with disgust. He shoved me hard, and I stumbled out onto the porch, barely catching myself before I fell. Then he held up my purse, dangling it in the air mockingly. You want this? He didn't wait for an answer. He drew his arm back and hurled my bag across the lawn. It landed in the damp grass near the sidewalk, my belongings scattering in the darkness. Get out, he roared, his voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. And don't you ever come back here. You are no longer my daughter. Dad, I cried out one final time, my voice raw with desperation. But he just stepped back inside the house. Vincent, the neighbors, I heard my mother say urgently from inside, her voice hushed but sharp. But my father just looked at me one last time, with nothing but pure contempt in his eyes. She's a disgrace, he spat, and then the heavy door slammed shut. The sharp click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest, most final sound I'd ever heard in my entire life. I stood there on that porch, my cheeks still stinging from my mother's slap, my arm throbbing from my father's brutal grip. The humiliation was a physical weight crushing down on my chest, making it nearly impossible to breathe. I was shaking, from the cold, from the shock, from the sheer disbelief of what had just happened. I stumbled down the porch steps, my legs unsteady beneath me. I walked across the wet grass to retrieve my purse, picking up my scattered belongings in the darkness, and trudged to the curb where my old car was parked. It was a 12-year-old sedan, deliberately kept to maintain my image as the family failure, the one car my family would never want to borrow or be seen in. I got in and shut the door. The silence inside the car was absolutely deafening. I just sat there, staring at that perfect, warmly lit house, the house that was no longer my home, the house I'd been paying for in secret. And then the tears finally came. Not just tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that tore through my entire body. I wasn't just crying because of the bracelet I didn't steal, or the slap or being thrown out onto the lawn. I was crying for 32 years of trying. 32 years of never, ever being good enough. I sat in the darkness of my old sedan, the sound of my own desperate sobs filling the cramped space. A failure, a thief, a disgrace. Those were the words my father and mother had used to describe me. They stung like open wounds, leaving marks on my soul, just like my mother's slap had left a mark on my face. I cried for the humiliation. I cried because after 3 decades of trying to earn their love and approval, I had finally been thrown away like garbage. But as the minutes ticked by in that cold, dark car, the hot tears of shame began to cool and harden. A different memory pushed its way through the suffocating pain. A memory from exactly 14 months ago. It wasn't in their dining room or their perfect house. It was in my real apartment. The penthouse they didn't know existed, until they were desperate and came crawling to me for help. They had shown up unannounced, bypassing the building's doorman by claiming it was a family emergency. My father Vincent, a man I had only ever seen as a proud, commanding presence, was on his knees. Actually, on his knees on my polished hardwood floor. "Natasha, I was laid off," he'd stammered, his face ashen and gray. 7 months ago. "I've been using my severance pay, but it's completely gone now. The bank is about to foreclose on the house, Natasha. Please." My mother Patricia was beside him, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "They're taking our home," she whispered, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Our entire life. Everything we've built." I remember just standing there, completely frozen, staring at them in disbelief. "You have to save us," my father had pleaded, his voice cracking. "We know you. You do well with your computer work. We know you have money saved. We saw a bank statement that came to the house by mistake last year." And then my mother grabbed my hand, her grip desperate and painful. "But you absolutely cannot tell Bianca. You understand me, Natasha. She's at such a critical, delicate point with Dominic right now. If his wealthy family discovers we're in financial trouble, if she loses face in front of them, it will destroy her entire future. It will ruin everything. They didn't just ask me to save them. They asked me to save them in complete secrecy. They asked me to keep funding Bianca's perfect, luxurious life, to keep paying for her elite design school tuition, to keep up the family's respectable image, to keep leasing her expensive Mercedes. All while I continued to play the role of the broke, worthless, disappointing daughter. And like a fool, I did it. I agreed to everything. Back in the cold, damp car, my tears stopped completely. The shock and pain vanished, replaced by an icy, razor-sharp clarity. They didn't just throw me out tonight. They threw out their only lifeline, their only source of survival. "You want me to disappear?" I whispered to the empty, silent street. The image of my mother's furious, hateful face flashing vividly in my mind. "Fine." I wiped my wet cheeks, smearing the tears across my face. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. It was perfectly steady. I sat there in the driver's seat, the engine off. The only sound, the faint ticking of the cooling metal under the hood. My breath fogged up the windshield, obscuring the perfect house that was no longer my home. But the fog in my mind had completely cleared. The humiliation and pain were still there, buried deep, but something else had taken over. A cold, hard, unshakable clarity. They didn't just throw me out. They threw out the person who was keeping them afloat. They had begged me to save them, to protect their secrets, to fund their entire fabricated lifestyle, all while treating me like I was worthless trash. They had made their choice that night. Now I was making mine. My hand was completely steady as I reached for my phone. I unlocked it, my thumb tapping the icon for my private banking app, not the simple one my parents used, but the one linked to my investment and trading accounts, the one they had absolutely no idea existed. My face scanned, and the app opened smoothly. My account balance was displayed clearly, a number with 8 figures. But I ignored it completely. I navigated straight to the scheduled payments section. There it was, the complete list of their lives, all funded silently by me. My finger hovered over the screen for just a second. Then I pressed firmly. First, mortgage payment for Vincent and Patricia Calloway. Monthly charge of $5,200. I tapped Cancel Recurring Payment. A prompt appeared on the screen. Are you sure? I pressed Confirm without hesitation. Start edit. Second, tuition fee for the Design Institute of Milan, Bianca's school. Quarterly charge of $31,000. Cancel recurring payment. Are you sure? Confirm. Strongly. Lease payment for Mercedes-Benz S-Class, Bianca's car. $1,050 per month. Cancel recurring payment. Confirm. Finally, I paused at the last entry. Family health insurance plan covering Vincent, Patricia, and Bianca Calloway. This was the most important one. This was the policy that covered all of them, including my father's critical heart medication and my mother's prescriptions. My finger didn't even tremble. Cancel recurring payment. Are you sure? Confirm. A final summary screen appeared, showing all the updates. All 4 payments were now listed as permanently canceled, effective immediately. I closed the app, locked my phone, and tossed it onto the empty passenger seat beside me. The silence in the car felt completely different now. It was no longer the silence of despair and defeat. It was the silence of control and power. I turned the key in the ignition. The old engine rumbled to life with a rough, familiar sound. I put the car in gear, pulled slowly away from the curb, and drove away. I didn't look back, not even once. I didn't drive to a cheap motel or crash on a friend's couch. I didn't head to some rundown apartment to lick my wounds. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the worn steering wheel of my old, deliberate failure car. I drove for nearly 30 minutes, leaving their quiet, judgmental suburb far behind, and headed straight toward the glowing, vibrant lights of the city center. The anger and humiliation were still burning hot in my chest like live coals. But beneath all of that, the cold, hard clarity was stronger. It was unshakable. They thought I was a failure. They thought I was worthless. They thought I was nothing. They had absolutely no idea who I really was or what I was truly capable of. I turned into the private underground entrance of the Azure Tower. This wasn't just any building. This was the luxury high-rise that Bianca and my mother always read about obsessively in their society magazines. The one they dreamed about visiting someday just to see how the other half lived. My key fob beeped, and the heavy security gate rolled open smoothly, leading me down into the private residential parking garage. I parked my 12-year-old embarrassment of a car right between a gleaming silver Porsche and a pristine white Range Rover. It looked absolutely ridiculous sitting there. I allowed myself a small, bitter smile at the sight. I didn't go through the main lobby where the doorman and curious residents might see me. My key fob summoned the private residential elevator. The doors opened silently, and I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the top floor, the penthouse level. The elevator rose smoothly and swiftly, and when the doors opened again, they didn't open into a shared hallway. They opened directly into my home. It was vast and breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire apartment, showcasing a stunning panoramic view of the glittering city lights stretching out endlessly in every direction. The floors were polished dark wood. The furniture was sleek, minimalist, and modern. Everything was silent, clean, and most importantly, safe. This was my real home, the one I had paid for entirely in cash, the one no bank could ever take from me. I walked past my state-of-the-art kitchen with its gleaming marble countertops and professional-grade appliances, and headed straight into my office. 8 large monitors were mounted on the wall, glowing softly in the darkness. They were alive with scrolling green and red lines tracking the global financial markets in real time. This was my so-called pathetic computer job. This was my 12-hour-a-day obsession. This was the empire I had built entirely on my own, brick by brick, trade by trade. While they were calling me worthless, I was making more money in a single week than my father had made in an entire year at his old job. I switched on my high-end espresso machine. The rich, comforting smell of fresh coffee began to fill the quiet space, cutting through the stale memory of my mother's overwhelming perfume and Bianca's lies. I glanced at the digital clock on the wall. The London market would be opening in less than an hour. I took a slow sip of the strong, hot coffee. The fire in my chest finally began to settle into a cold, hard, unbreakable resolve. It was time to get back to work. As I sat down in my expensive leather chair, my other phone, my private line, the one my family didn't even know existed, began to ring on the desk. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The morning sun streamed brilliantly into my office, hitting the glass and steel of the towering buildings outside my window. The London market had been incredibly volatile overnight, but I'd already cleared $63,000 in profit before 9 in the morning. This was my routine. This was my real life. The humiliation from the night before, the spilled water, the violent slap, being physically thrown onto the damp lawn, felt strangely distant now, like something I'd watched happen to someone else in a movie. On the polished marble island in my kitchen, next to my espresso machine, my other phone started vibrating loudly. It was the cheap prepaid phone I kept specifically for them, the burner phone that matched perfectly with my 12-year-old car and my carefully crafted failure persona. The screen lit up brightly with her name, Bianca. A year ago, my heart would have leaped straight into my throat. I would have fumbled desperately to answer it, terrified of what she wanted, desperate to please her, afraid of making things worse. Now, I just watched it buzz and rattle against the cold marble. It rang and rang, the angry sound echoing in the peaceful silence of my penthouse. I let it go to voicemail without touching it. I picked up my coffee, took a slow, deliberate sip, and looked out over the endless city skyline. A few seconds later, the phone buzzed again with a notification. New voicemail. I was genuinely curious. I tapped the notification calmly and put the phone on speaker. I wanted to hear her panic echo through my space. Wanted to hear the desperation in her voice. Bianca's voice, usually so smooth and condescending, was a high-pitched, frantic shriek. "Natasha, where the hell are you? Pick up the damn phone. Just pick it up right now." The message ended abruptly. A second later, beep. Another voicemail started immediately. "Natasha, I'm not joking around. I just got an email from the Design Institute. My tuition payment was declined." "It was declined, Natasha. What did you do? What did you say to Mom and Dad?" "They're not answering their phones either." "What the hell is going on?" I took another slow sip of my coffee. The charts on my main monitor were trending beautifully green across the board. It was going to be an extremely profitable day. Beat. A third voicemail. Her voice was even more unhinged now. "You're trying to ruin my wedding, aren't you, you psycho? You're just jealous of me and Dominic. You're trying to sabotage everything I've worked for. You pick up this phone right now, or I swear I will. I will. The message cut off abruptly, as she apparently ran out of threats. The silence of my penthouse returned, broken only by the quiet, steady hum of my trading computers. I stared at the notification on the cheap phone's cracked screen. 3 new voicemails. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the callback button for just a brief second before moving deliberately to the side. I selected all 3 voicemail messages. I dragged them slowly to the trash icon. A prompt appeared on the screen. Delete 3 messages. I pressed confirm without hesitation. Gone. I turned back to my glowing monitors, my coffee worn in my hand. The market was waiting, and I had work to do. I was deep in concentration, analyzing a complex futures trade on the Tokyo Exchange when the old burner phone started rattling violently against the marble countertop again. I glanced at the screen without moving from my chair. This time it was Mom flashing across the display. I watched it vibrate, the name pulsing with desperate urgency. I thought about her face last night, contorted with pure rage as she called me a thief. I thought about the sharp burning sting of her slap across my cheek. The ringing finally stopped. A moment later, the voicemail notification appeared brightly on the screen. I turned up the volume on the speaker, genuinely curious to hear this new chapter of their unfolding panic. Patricia's voice crackled to life through the speaker. But it wasn't a scream like Bianca's frantic messages. It was a low, tight, furious whisper, the kind of voice she used when she was trying desperately to contain her rage in a public place where people might be watching. Natasha, I don't know what sick, twisted little game you think you're playing right now, but you need to stop it immediately. Do you hear me? Stop it right now. There was a pause, and I could hear faint beeping sounds in the background, like she was standing in a grocery store checkout line. Your father's credit card was just declined at the country club, right in front of all his friends. He had to have Bill Johnson pay for his lunch tab. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for him? How embarrassing. Her voice got progressively tighter and sharper. And my card, my American Express card, Natasha, it was declined at the grocery store. I had a completely full cart of groceries, a full cart. I had to just leave everything sitting there at the register. The cashier was staring at me. Everyone in line behind me was staring at me. I have never been so mortified in my entire life. She was almost hissing now, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. What is going on, Natasha? What did you do? You call me back this very instant. You are embarrassing this entire family. Do you understand me? This entire family. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I sat there for a long moment, processing her words carefully. Not, are you okay, Natasha? Not, did we make a terrible mistake? Not even, why did you do this? Just, you are embarrassing this family. That was all it had ever been for them. Image, appearances, reputation, what other people thought of them. I picked up the burner phone calmly. I opened the call log and scrolled through it slowly. I saw Bianca's multiple missed calls. I saw my mother's name repeated over and over. I went into my contacts list methodically. I found Bianca's name. I pressed block contact. A pop-up appeared, asking, "Are you sure you want to block this contact?" I pressed confirm. I scrolled down and found Mom. I pressed block contact. Confirm. I turned the phone over so it was lying screen down on the marble counter. That way I wouldn't even have to see it light up anymore. The silence in my penthouse felt absolutely clean and liberating. The next morning, I was completely in my element. The Asian markets had just opened, and I was carefully tracking a significant fluctuation in a major tech stock. My penthouse office was silent, except for the soft glow of my 8 monitors surrounding me. I felt focused, powerful, and completely in control. The memory of Sunday night, of my father's rough hands shoving me violently out the door, felt like a scene from someone else's distant lifetime. I had blocked their phone numbers. I had cut the cord completely. A small notification suddenly popped up on my 4th monitor, the one I use exclusively for personal email and communication. It was an email. The sender was Bianca Calloway. My finger hovered instinctively over the delete button. I had blocked her phone number, but I hadn't even thought about blocking her email address. A cold, sharp curiosity got the better of me. I clicked the email open. The subject line was just a string of angry capital letters and exclamation points. Answer your phone now. And parentheses, period, frank.irl. The body of the email was pure, unfiltered rage, written in frantic bursts. You think you can just hide from us? I had to give her credit for one thing. Her speed. It had taken her less than 48 hours to finally realize that her tuition payments and her car lease were both directly linked to the sister she'd always called a failure. Frank.Payne. The bank just called me, Natasha. The bank. They said my Mercedes S-Class is scheduled for repossession next week. They said the automatic payment failed, and nobody returned their calls. What did you do, you worthless piece of trash? You're deliberately trying to ruin my entire life. First my school, now my car. Dad is still recovering in the hospital because of you. And this is what you do? You're pure evil, Natasha. Absolutely evil. I read the email twice, slowly and carefully, the all-caps letters, the desperate, frantic tone. She wasn't worried about our father lying in a hospital bed. She was panicking about her car. She was terrified about the image she presented to Dominic and his impossibly wealthy family. She was absolutely horrified at the thought of looking poor or struggling in front of them. I stared at the email for another long moment. Then I looked at my trading screen, which clearly showed I had just made more money in a single morning than her precious Mercedes was even worth. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel guilt. I felt absolutely nothing at all. I clicked the forward button calmly. In the recipient field, I typed slowly and deliberately, TRASH. I hit send. Then I right-clicked on Bianca's email address. A small menu appeared on the screen. I moved the cursor down slowly and clicked Block Sender. A confirmation box appeared. Block all future emails from this sender. I clicked yes. It was almost pathetic in a way. For 32 long years, I had lived in constant fear of Bianca's anger and disapproval. Her yelling, her cruel insults, her systematic way of making me feel small and worthless had controlled so much of my life. Now her rage, even when typed frantically in all capital letters, felt like nothing more than a child's powerless tantrum. It couldn't reach me here in my sanctuary. It couldn't touch my success or my peace. She was furious that I had taken away her favorite toy. A toy I had been paying for all along. A toy she drove around in while I deliberately drove my 12-year-old embarrassment of a car, so they could all continue feeling superior to me. The irony was suffocating and bitter. She, the golden child, the family success story, was absolutely nothing without the failure she had spent her entire life despising. I took a long sip of my coffee, ready to refocus and get back to work. I was completely done with all of them. I had successfully cut off every single line of communication. Every bridge was burned. Every door was locked. And then, unexpectedly, the intercom in my apartment buzzed loudly. The sharp, intrusive sound made me jump slightly in my chair. I looked over at the security panel mounted on the wall near my front door. The screen lit up brightly, showing the lobby far below. My doorman, Sebastian, was looking up at the camera with a stressed, uncomfortable expression on his face. I pressed the button to respond. Yes, Sebastian? Miss Calloway, I'm truly sorry to disturb you. There are two women down here in the main lobby, a Mrs. Patricia Calloway and a Ms. Bianca Calloway. They claim to be your family. He paused, clearly uncomfortable. Well, ma'am, they're causing quite a significant scene down here. The intercom's sharp buzz had shattered the peaceful silence of my penthouse, like breaking glass. It was jarring and completely unwelcome in my carefully controlled sanctuary. I glanced at the security panel mounted on the wall. The screen displayed Sebastian's face clearly, my building's professional head doorman. He looked genuinely flustered and uncomfortable, which was unusual for him. I pressed the intercom button, and his voice came through the speaker immediately. "Miss Calloway, I sincerely apologize for the interruption. There are 2 women down here in the lobby, a Mrs. Patricia Calloway and a Miss Bianca Calloway." He said their names like a careful question, as if he genuinely couldn't believe these people were actually related to the quiet, successful professional woman living in the penthouse. "They are, well, ma'am, they're making quite a scene down here. They're becoming disruptive. I could picture it perfectly in my mind. My mother, Patricia, pacing frantically across the pristine marble lobby floor, her voice sharp and demanding. My sister Bianca probably on the verge of theatrical tears, or more likely threatening to call a lawyer she absolutely couldn't afford. They were completely out of their element, and they were reacting with their usual predictable chaos and drama. They're insisting very loudly that they're your family and that you're expecting them to come up, Sebastian continued, his voice tight and strained. They're becoming increasingly loud and disruptive, ma'am. Other residents are starting to notice and complain. Of course, they were causing a scene. Humiliation and public drama were practically the family currency, and they were experts at spending it freely, whether it was mine or their own. I let out a long, slow breath. I had blocked their phone numbers. I had blocked their emails. I should have known they would escalate to this. They were like children pounding desperately on a locked door, demanding to be let back inside so they could continue breaking everything. It's fine, Sebastian, I said, my voice calm and controlled. I was expecting them, just not quite this early. A small lie to calm my doorman and avoid further disruption. Please send them up. I'll handle this situation myself. Are you absolutely certain, Miss Calloway? Sebastian asked, clearly concerned. I can have building security escort them out immediately if you'd prefer. No, I said firmly, a cold resolve settling over me like armor. It's time I handled this directly. Please send them up now. Yes, ma'am, right away. The intercom connection clicked off sharply. The screen went dark. I stood up slowly from my desk. I didn't bother checking my appearance in a mirror. I didn't smooth my hair or adjust my clothes. I simply walked out of my office, across the silent, sprawling living room, and stood directly in front of the private elevator doors that opened straight into my home. I folded my arms across my chest. I stared at the brushed steel doors. I listened carefully to the faint mechanical whir of the elevator as it began its long ascent from the ground floor. The failure, the thief, the family disgrace was waiting, and I was ready. The elevator chimed softly, a polite, gentle sound announcing their arrival. I stood near the entrance of my penthouse, my arms crossed, and I waited. The brushed steel doors slid open smoothly and silently. My mother, Patricia, and my sister, Bianca, stood frozen inside the elevator. For a full 3 or 4 seconds, they didn't move at all. They just stared at me and their surroundings with expressions of pure, complete shock. They had dressed for battle today. They were clearly ready to storm into what they imagined would be a cramped, cheap apartment. They were prepared to scream at their failure relative in some run-down place. They were absolutely not prepared for this. Their eyes darted around wildly, desperately trying to process everything they were seeing. They looked past me, through the grand entrance, into the soaring open space beyond. They saw the gleaming marble floors. They saw the impossibly high ceilings. They saw the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the entire breathtaking city skyline. They looked like they'd just been transported to another planet. Bianca was the first one to find her voice. Her mouth opened and closed uselessly, making a small gasping sound like a fish out of water. She took one shaky step out of the elevator, her eyes still scanning everything in disbelief. You, she stammered, her voice weak and confused. You live here? Actually here? I didn't answer her question. I just raised one eyebrow slightly and stared at her. I let the silence and the stunning view behind me speak for themselves. Her confusion lasted only a brief moment before it twisted and contorted into her default emotion. Pure, unfiltered rage. The shock was immediately replaced by furious accusation. "Where did you get this?" she shrieked, her voice high-pitched and piercing, echoing loudly in the enormous open space. "Where did you get all this money, Natasha?" She took another aggressive step forward, her eyes narrowing with suspicion and fury. "Oh my God, the bracelet. You did steal it, didn't you? You stole it and you pawned it somewhere. You used my bracelet to buy all of this. You're a thief. You're an actual criminal." My mother Patricia was still pale and frozen, clutching her designer handbag tightly to her chest, as if I might steal it right there. She was staring past me into my state-of-the-art kitchen, where my expensive appliances gleamed under the recessed lighting. She wasn't just shocked. She looked deeply, personally betrayed. "Natasha, all this time," she whispered, her voice trembling with a different kind of anger. "All this time you've been lying to us. You've been living like this." "Lying?" I finally spoke, my voice flat and ice-cold. "I've been living my own life. You're the ones who wrote the entire script about me being a failure. You created that story. I just let you believe it." "You let us worry about you," Patricia cried, suddenly finding her footing and her anger. "You let your father and me stress constantly about how you were going to survive. All while you were living here in this palace. What kind of sick, twisted game have you been playing with us?" Bianca was still fixated on her primary concern, herself. "My car, Natasha, my tuition payments, you stopped everything. You have all this money and you just cut me off completely." "You called me a thief," I said simply, my voice quiet but carrying through the room. "You told everyone I was jealous of you. You stood there and watched while Dad physically threw me out onto the lawn like garbage." "We were trying to teach you a lesson," Bianca screamed desperately, her voice cracking. "We were trying to help you grow up. And you've been living this secret life the whole time. You've been stealing from us to pay for all of this. You're paying for everything here by." She looked around wildly, her mind racing, trying desperately to find any explanation that fit her narrow narrative. "You're selling drugs or something, aren't you? Or you have some rich man keeping you like a pet. That's it, isn't it? You didn't earn any of this. You couldn't possibly have earned this." I almost laughed out loud. It was so predictable, so pathetic. They literally could not comprehend that I, the failure, the disappointment, could have possibly achieved any of this on my own merit. Their small, limited minds needed to invent a crime or a man or some kind of deception to explain my success. Pause. I unfolded my arms slowly and leaned casually against the doorframe. I looked at my sister, her face twisted and red with impotent rage. Then I looked at my mother, who was staring at me as if I were a complete stranger. "I earned it," I said, my voice cold, clear, and absolutely final. "I work, I trade, I invest, I make money." I paused deliberately, then delivered the final, devastating blow. Unlike some people in this room, I actually earned every single thing I have. My words, cold, sharp, and brutally honest, hung heavily in the air of my penthouse. Bianca's face flushed an ugly, dark red. She looked like she was about to scream again, about to lunge at me, to accuse me of something else, anything else that would make her shattered reality make sense again. But she never got the chance. My mother Patricia finally scrambled to her feet from where she'd been standing frozen. Her face was no longer just shocked. It was a twisted mask of pure, desperate rage. She shoved past Bianca roughly, her eyes locked on mine with frightening intensity. The fake concern, the performed worry from earlier, it was all gone now. The mask had completely fallen away. "Your car?" she hissed at Bianca, her voice low and trembling. "You're worried about your stupid car right now? She turned her full fury directly on me, taking an aggressive step forward. "The bank called us, Natasha." Her voice wasn't a scream. It was a low, dangerous growl. "Not about tuition payments. Not about a car lease. The bank that holds the mortgage on our house. The payment was rejected and returned. The official foreclosure notice is already in the mail." Her hands were shaking violently at her sides. "You did this. You deliberately did this to us." She lunged forward suddenly, her hands raised as if to slap me again, exactly like she had done 3 nights ago. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just stood there calmly in the entrance of my own penthouse, in my own home, my own safe space, and I stared directly at her. I watched this woman, the woman who had called me a thief and a disgrace, who had stood silently by while I was thrown out, completely unravel because her free ride was finally permanently over. She stopped just inches short of actually hitting me, her hand trembling violently in the air between us. The realization that I wasn't cowering, that I wasn't crying or begging, seemed to genuinely confuse her. It threw her off completely. "Why should I pay the mortgage on a house I was physically thrown out of?" I asked. My voice quiet, calm, and devastatingly reasonable. The sound of my words echoed clearly in the large open space. "You owe us," Patricia stammered, her rage faltering and cracking. "We raised you. We fed you. We gave you a home and a childhood." "A home you kicked me out of," I replied, my voice still eerily calm. "You stood right there in that house and watched your husband grab me and throw me onto the lawn like trash. You called me a disgrace. You called me a thief. You slapped me across the face. He told me I was no longer his daughter." I took a single deliberate step back, putting more distance between us. "You absolutely cannot disown someone and then expect them to continue paying all your bills." I looked at her, at this woman I had tried desperately my entire life to please, to impress, to make proud. I was no longer her daughter. I was no longer a failure or a disappointment. I was simply done with all of it. "You should remember something very important, Mrs. Calloway," I said, my voice clear and cold. "I was told very clearly to get out and never come back. So I did exactly that. And I took my finances with me when I left." The formal name, Mrs. Calloway instead of Mom, hit her harder than any physical blow ever could. The rage in her face evaporated instantly, replaced by pale, sputtering shock and disbelief. "You just called me," she whispered, her hand dropping uselessly to her side. "You called me Mrs. Calloway." Patricia's face crumpled completely. My cold, deliberate use of Mrs. Calloway was a wall she couldn't break through with anger or manipulation. The fury in her eyes dissolved entirely, replaced by raw, desperate animal panic. This wasn't the daughter she could control anymore. This was a wealthy, powerful stranger who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. The tears that came next were genuine, but they weren't tears of remorse or regret. They were tears of pure, undiluted terror. "Natasha, please," she sobbed, taking a clumsy, stumbling step toward me, her hand reaching out desperately. "Natasha, sweetheart, you can't do this to us. You just can't. That house is our entire life. It's your father's home, the home where you grew up and made all your childhood memories. I didn't move even an inch. The home you physically threw me out of," I said flatly, my voice completely emotionless. "We were angry and upset," she cried, the tears now streaming down her face freely. "We made a terrible mistake. Your father, Vincent, he's not well, Natasha. His heart. You know about his heart condition. This kind of stress could actually kill him. It's tearing him apart. You can't just throw away your entire family like this. You just can't." "Family," I repeated the word slowly, letting it sit in the air between us like something rotten. Family doesn't frame their own sister for theft. Family doesn't call their daughter a thief. and then stand by silently while she's thrown onto the lawn in the cold. "You're just doing this to hurt me," Bianca finally found her voice again. She had been frozen near the elevator, utterly paralyzed by the sight of my apartment and her rapidly collapsing world. I turned my cold gaze directly to her. "Hurt you, Bianca?" I asked, a small, cold smile touching my lips. "I'm just cleaning up my personal finances, organizing my accounts. You should try it sometime. It's very freeing." I let the words hang there for a moment. "And speaking of finances," I continued, "that design school tuition is extremely expensive, isn't it? It must be incredibly difficult scrambling to find that money now." I paused deliberately, letting the full weight of her situation sink in. "You know what? You really should have just pawned that lost bracelet yourself. That would have solved everything." Bianca gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. She had no answer. She knew that I knew the truth. She knew I wasn't buying her ridiculous transparent story. She looked wildly at her mother, desperate for help, for backup, for someone to save her. But Patricia wasn't looking at Bianca anymore. My mother was frozen in place, staring down at her expensive phone, which had suddenly started ringing loudly in her trembling hand. It wasn't her usual cheerful, familiar ringtone. It was a sharp, formal, buzzing sound, the one she reserved specifically for unknown numbers and potential emergencies. Patricia fumbled desperately in her designer purse with shaking hands. She pulled out the phone and stared at the glowing screen. Her face, already deathly pale, somehow lost every last trace of color. She looked like she might faint. "Mom," Bianca whispered, her own panic momentarily forgotten. "Who is it? Is it the bank calling again?" Patricia shook her head slowly, her eyes wide with a completely new kind of fear, a different terror altogether. She looked up at me, and for a brief moment, I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. She looked utterly helpless. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's Mercy General Hospital." Patricia stood completely frozen, staring at her phone as it continued ringing insistently in her shaking hand. The caller ID displayed clearly, "Mercy General Hospital." "Mom," Bianca whispered urgently, all her own drama instantly forgotten. "Who is calling? Is it the bank again? Please tell me it's just the bank." My mother slowly shook her head, her hand trembling violently as she fumbled to answer the call. She pressed the phone to her ear with both hands to steady it. "Hello," she said, her voice barely a whisper. There was a long, terrible pause. I watched her face intently. The very last bit of color drained completely from it. Her eyes went impossibly wide, not with anger anymore, but with a new, hollow, devastating terror. "What?" she whispered into the phone, her voice cracking. "What did you just say? Mercy General, is he? Oh my God." Her knees buckled completely beneath her. She didn't faint, but she collapsed hard onto the expensive marble floor of my entryway. Her designer handbag, which she'd been clutching so tightly, skittered away across the polished surface, spilling its contents everywhere, lipstick, keys, credit cards scattering like debris. "Vincent," she shrieked, a raw, guttural animal sound I had never heard from her before. "Oh my God, Vincent, he's at the hospital." Bianca rushed immediately to her side, dropping to her knees. "Mom, what's wrong? What happened to Dad? What's happening?" Patricia looked up, her face a complete mask of disbelief and horror. "Your father," she gasped, struggling to breathe. "He had a heart attack. He collapsed at the bank this morning. They said he collapsed right after the bank manager told him about the foreclosure. Oh God, he's in intensive care right now." Bianca stumbled backward, as if she'd been physically struck. "A heart attack," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Oh my God, it's all falling apart. Everything is falling apart." Patricia was sobbing now, hitting the marble floor weakly with her fist. "It's over. The house, the money, Vincent. Everything is gone. Everything." Bianca's head suddenly snapped toward me. The shock and fear on her face vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, murderous, burning rage I had never seen in her before. Her eyes weren't just angry anymore. They were filled with pure, absolute hatred. "You," she screamed, lunging at me across the entryway. Her hands were clawed like an animal's. "This is your fault. All of this is your fault." I stepped back instinctively, but she was terrifyingly fast. She grabbed the front of my shirt violently, shoving me hard against the wall. "You did this," she screamed directly into my face. "Spittle flying. You and your sick, twisted games. You cut off the money. You gave him this stress. If he dies, Natasha, I swear to God, if Dad dies, I will kill you myself." She was shaking me violently, slamming me against the wall repeatedly, her face inches from mine. "I will kill you. Do you hear me? I will kill you." "Bianca," my mother screamed, scrambling to her feet. "Stop it. Stop it right now. We have to go. We have to get to the hospital immediately." Bianca held my gaze for one more long, terrible second. Her eyes were making me a promise of violence and revenge. Then she finally released me, shoving me one final brutal time against the wall, and ran for the elevator. She dragged our sobbing mother with her. The steel elevator doors slid shut with a quiet whoosh, leaving me completely alone in the ringing silence of my penthouse. I slid slowly down the wall until I was sitting on the cold marble floor. My heart was pounding violently in my chest. My shirt was twisted and wrinkled where Bianca had grabbed me. My mind was spinning out of control. A heart attack. She'd actually had a real heart attack. Bianca's words echoed endlessly in the empty space around me. "If he dies, I will kill you." My stomach turned to solid ice. Was this actually my fault? I had only taken back walls rightfully mine. I had only stopped them from bleeding me dry financially. I had only protected myself. But a heart attack. Was this what I truly wanted? Had I just killed my own father? If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The steel elevator doors closed with a final, echoing sound, leaving me standing alone in my penthouse. I remained there for a full minute, frozen in place. The imprint of Bianca's fingers still burned on my skin where she'd grabbed my shirt. Her scream, "If he dies, I will kill you," echoed endlessly off the high ceilings and marble floors. Did I? The thought was a cold, sharp spike of ice stabbing directly into my stomach. Did I actually cause my father's heart attack? I walked slowly, almost mechanically, back into my office. The 8 monitors were still glowing, patiently waiting for my commands and decisions. The Asian markets were open and active. The charts were fluctuating and moving. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, my fortress of pure logic and numbers, the place where I was always in complete, absolute control. I sat carefully in my expensive leather chair. I put my hand on the mouse. I tried to click. I couldn't. My hand was shaking too badly. I stared at the moving green and red lines on the screens, but they were just meaningless blurs now. All I could see was my father's face. Not the face of the cruel man who had thrown me out, but the face of the man who, 14 months ago, had knelt on this very floor, begging desperately for me to save his home. The stress, his heart condition. He'd always had heart problems. Patricia knew it, Bianca knew it, everyone knew it. And I had pulled the financial plug anyway, knowing full well what it might do to him. I stood up abruptly, unable to sit still. I paced the entire length of my living room, my bare feet silent on the cold marble, back and forth, from the massive wall of glass overlooking the endless city to the pristine stainless steel kitchen, back and forth. "You're a failure," my mother's venomous voice hissed in my memory. "A thief," my father's voice echoed coldly. "I will kill you," my sister's voice screamed. I sank onto the leather sofa, burying my face in my hands. Was this what I had wanted? Revenge? Was this victory? It didn't feel like victory at all. It felt sick. It felt hollow and wrong and empty. Then another voice surfaced, a different memory from long ago. If you fall down, you get back up, girl. Don't you ever, ever give up. I looked up suddenly, as if my father were actually standing right there in the room with me. The memory was sharp and crystal clear. I was 9 years old, sitting on the cracked sidewalk of our old neighborhood, long before the respectable house and the perfect image. My knee was badly skinned, bleeding onto the hot pavement. My new bicycle, the blue one I'd begged for, was lying twisted and broken on the grass nearby. I was crying huge, hot tears of pure frustration. I can't do it, I wailed. It's too hard. I hate it. I want to stop. My father Vincent crouched down directly in front of me. He wasn't the same cold, distant man from 3 nights ago. This version of my father was wearing an old, stained t-shirt covered in paint. He smelled like sawdust and strong coffee. He didn't try to comfort me or baby me. He just pointed firmly at my bloody knee. "Are you broken?" he asked directly. "My knee really hurts," I sobbed. "I didn't ask about your knee," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. He tapped my forehead gently with one finger. "I asked if you are broken. Inside." I sniffled, confused, and slowly shook my head. "No." "Good," he said, pulling me firmly to my feet. "Then get back on that bike right now. You fall, you get up. You never, ever give up. You hear me, Natasha? Never." That was the man who had taught me how to be strong and resilient. The man who had taught me to be a fighter. The man who had, in his own way, given me all the tools I needed to build this empire. How could that same man be the one who called me a thief and threw me out onto the lawn? I stood up from the sofa. I wasn't shaking anymore. He wasn't just my abuser and my betrayer. He was still my father, and I couldn't just sit here trading stocks and making money while he was lying in an intensive care unit, possibly dying. I wouldn't go crawling back to them. I wouldn't apologize or beg for forgiveness. But I had to know. I had to see for myself what was happening. I grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter. I got into the private elevator and rode it down to the parking garage. I climbed into my Tesla, my real car, the one they'd never seen, and I drove directly to Mercy General Hospital. I parked in the guest garage, my heart pounding a heavy, sickening rhythm against my ribs. I walked slowly through the sterile, antiseptic-smelling lobby, following the clearly marked signs toward the intensive care unit. I saw the sign hanging overhead, ICU waiting room, area 3B. Through the glass partition, I could see them clearly. Bianca was pacing frantically back and forth, her face pale and streaked with tears. My mother, Patricia, was crumpled in an uncomfortable plastic chair, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. I couldn't do it. I couldn't walk through those doors. I wasn't ready to face them again. Not yet. I noticed a small hospital cafe directly across the corridor. It was dim and mostly empty, but it had a perfect, unobstructed view of the waiting room doors. I walked in quietly, ordered a black coffee I knew I would never drink, and found a small corner table in the darkest part of the room. I would just wait here. I would just watch. I needed to know what was happening. I sat in the dark corner of the hospital cafe, the untouched coffee growing cold in my trembling hands. Through the glass windows, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the scene unfolding in the ICU waiting room across the hall. It was like watching a silent, tragic movie of my family's complete destruction. My mother, Patricia, was no longer the furious, commanding matriarch I'd known my entire life. She was a broken, crumpled mess in a hard plastic chair. Her expensive clothes wrinkled and stained with tears. Bianca wasn't pacing frantically anymore. She was sitting on the cold floor with her back pressed against the wall, rocking slowly back and forth. Her designer clothes rumpled and forgotten. She was muttering to herself, her face pale and blotchy with streaked makeup. A doctor in blue scrubs came through the heavy ICU doors and walked toward them. I couldn't hear his words through the thick glass, but I watched his gestures carefully. I saw my mother look up desperately, her face filled with frantic questions. I saw Bianca barely react at all. She just kept staring blankly at the floor, completely detached from reality. A part of me, the 9-year-old girl who had just wanted her father's approval and love, felt a sharp, agonizing twist of guilt deep in my chest. This was my fault. I had pulled the financial plug. I had caused all of this pain and chaos. But another part of me, colder and harder, the 32-year-old woman they had thrown onto the lawn and called a thief, just watched silently. I had simply stopped paying their bills. Their reaction to that, my father's weak heart, Bianca's cruel lies, that was all on them, not on me. I was so completely lost in this internal battle, this war between guilt and justification, that I didn't notice someone approaching my small table until he spoke. Natasha. My head snapped up sharply. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He was completely out of context, out of place. It was Dominic, Bianca's wealthy fiancé. He was wearing an expensive, perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked calm, clean, and completely in control, like he'd just stepped confidently out of a corporate boardroom, not a devastating family crisis. My first instinct was pure panic. I thought he was here to confront me, to threaten me on Bianca's behalf, to finish the violent job my family had started. I braced myself defensively. "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer immediately. He just calmly pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, placing his expensive leather briefcase carefully on the floor beside him. He looked at me with surprisingly clear, analytical blue eyes. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly. His voice had no trace of anger or accusation. "I have absolutely nothing to say to you," I shot back defensively. "Go back to your fiancé." He completely ignored my hostility. He just leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the table, and said the words that made my heart stop completely. "I know you didn't steal the bracelet, Natasha." I just stared at him, unable to breathe. "What did he just say?" He continued calmly, his voice still low and measured. "I know you're not the thief. I know Bianca lied about everything. I know this because I personally watched her hide that bracelet herself, and I have the video proof to prove it." This story is a powerful reminder that self-worth can never be defined by those who choose to diminish you. Natasha silently carried her family, financially, while they openly mocked her as a failure. Their perfect life was built entirely on the success of the person they despised most. The moment she was betrayed and discarded, she reclaimed her power by taking back what was rightfully hers. The lesson here is clear. Never allow others to define your value, and have the courage to walk away from those who exploit your kindness while refusing to see your true worth. Have you ever had to be the so-called villain just to protect your own peace and sanity? Share your story in the comments below.